Hi everyone, I'm Rob Scott from UC Today. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to be addressing one of the hottest topics in UC right now, and that's compliance. As enterprises race to modernize, moving from legacy PBX systems to cloud-first platforms like Microsoft Teams Phone and Zoom Phone, there's an emerging risk that many organizations are overlooking, and that's voice is fast becoming the weakest link in unified communications compliance. So today I'm joined by Garth Landers from Theta Lake to explore why voice compliance remains such a technical challenge. So let's dive in. Welcome, Garth. How's it going?
Great to see you again, Rob. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. And this, as I said before, it really is a big topic. I mean, compliance
Yes.
continues to, enter most conversations at the moment, especially with the advent of AI. So, I mean, first of all, voice compliance often lags behind messaging and meeting content. Why is it still a challenge for enterprise IT leaders, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, voice compliance has been around for, a long time, right? And predates all the things we're here to talk about today with unified communications. It's a highly regulated area, much like, what e-coms that we call them, right? Electronic communications like chat and email. So it's not a new problem, but it's been a challenge for a number of technical reasons. And fundamentally, historically, voice infrastructure, you mentioned PBXs and its compliance counterparts, they've been on premise, they've been highly siloed in the past, with really not a lot of overlap and intersection with other communication types like your email system and other things, and historically. So your voice archive and your email archive, were designed to do very different things and operated in totally different environments. And now both, have been faced with the adoption of unified communications for some time now. And there you have things like conversations, they're not siloed by their very nature, right? They're meshing and intersecting not only voice, but voice with chat and maybe integrated SMS and messaging features and screen sharing. So fundamentally and architecturally, that in itself, presents a lot of challenges for those legacy approaches. You're talking about years of accumulated technology, expertise, and content, right? That's been built up and now being asked to change. So enterprises, have been left with this sort of question of how do I solve this, right? I, got two sets of sort of competing vendors and they're trying to intersect and they do very different things and they're not complementary. And having these silos in today's sort of integrated, UC dominated communications infrastructure doesn't work.
Yeah, indeed. And a lot of organizations, especially large enterprises, big complex companies are trying to migrate still from on-premises to cloud platforms like Teams and Zoom, for example. What are the biggest challenges there for those organizations?
Yeah, the biggest challenge is there, as we talked about, right? You've got that architectural challenge and sort of legacy challenge. And now you're trying to bring those together. And then there's another element, right? When you mention things, that are really blazing the trail for, cloud voice, things like Teams and Zoom Phone and all of those, UC phone options of everything that we have today. The very nature of a phone by itself has changed, right? So you have that. But as those platforms build and innovate and deliver functionality, and they do so on a constant, continual basis because they're SaaS based, and all the vendors are by and large. Enterprises are getting new features, they're receiving new functionality, and sometimes they don't even know it, right? So their compliance vendors are not keeping pace with the innovation from a Microsoft or a Zoom or a Ring Central or any number of cloud-based options, contact centers, right? So you have these vendor-driven approaches that are now creating compliance gaps because they're not keeping pace. The challenge here is you really, in all of these use cases, you need to solve what's called the data problem, and you need to have the data quality, the completeness, all of the elements of the data, all of the elements of a digital conversation, not just voice, in one place so that it's complete and that you have an understanding of it, of where it lives, so that there aren't challenges downstream in terms of compliance workflows or responding to audits or investigations or litigation. Really, that challenge is upfront, making sure that you are capturing, solving that data problem, and having the communications for record keeping and compliance.
Yeah, well, we certainly are living this kind of. We are in the era of fully unified communications now, aren't we? We've way beyond just cloud PBXs with voice only, and it sounds like these fully unified communications platforms need a fully unified compliance solution. So, I think that's the key message here. So, how does Theta Lake provide kind of risk detection and kind of archiving capabilities that actually work at scale for these enterprises?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, we're solving that data problem up front. So we're making sure we have all of the right content and information and that we understand it, right? We understand it from a metadata standpoint, from a context standpoint, and from a content standpoint, so that when you do, start to apply, what you were talking about in your question, things like risk detections. And in our case, they're based on machine learning and natural language processing, and come out of the box, and you can create a limitless number of permutations, right? They address all of your sort of voice requirements around MiFID II and different requirements for the FCA and different international regulations related to voice, Dodd-Frank in the US, for example, so that you can detect that risk. But in addition to that, right, solving that data problem up front also means that architecturally, you're eliminating those silos. So it's like a three-step process to answer your question. You've got to have the data and you've got to understand it. You've got to put it in a place, meaning something like a cloud-based environment like AWS or Microsoft Azure. And in Theta Lake's case, that could be our storage and archive or yours, and you can bring your own key so that operationally, you can recall that information really quickly, respond to those governance events like audits and investigation and litigation. And then lastly, you've got that data quality and understanding. Now you can apply the machine learning and natural language processing that's going to operate really efficiently and identify that risk so that your compliance teams are supercharged, really productive, and reducing the amount of false positives that could certainly arise when you're capturing all of this data. So solving that data problem up front is really essential to making sure AI works in your risk detections.
Fantastic. And what would your advice be to IT and compliance leaders that are planning for AI-driven voice features, and even virtual agents in contact centers? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think it's about getting ahead of it from a compliance perspective. The great thing is, right, is that we're in this period of change and transition. So we're starting to look at and understand which platforms are really important to us. Whether it's and they can be multiple, right? We see that most firms have anywhere from 4 to 6 communication platforms in place. So whether you're AI-driven voice features or virtual agents or your AI summarization or transcription engines are operating, on those platforms, you're going to want to choose a provider that naturally does the things we talked about today. Integrates at the source, understands that data, preserves it in its native context and format so that you can understand it, and really sets the table for those record-keeping operations so that you can be successful in detecting risk later on. But without having the right partner that's going to align with your communications provider, partner with them, work with them directly. You don't want this to be a sort of services-driven, what I would call science project that's designed to eliminate those gaps, right? You want to cover those gaps up front and start early. So now's a great time because as organizations, we're making those choices.
And from an innovation standpoint of Theta Lake, you've just announced an AI governance suite, haven't you? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that quickly? Because I think this is really relevant to the conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely, Rob. So this week we launched the Theta Lake AI Governance and Inspection Suite, and it contains 3 modules designed to address very popular use cases. So, many organizations, for example, are concerned about, note-taking and bots and transcription engines that may be appearing in your meeting environments as sort of delegates for your users, and they don't even know that those exist. So, the first one of the modules absolutely identifies and detects and notifies you about that. The other modules, the other 2, are really specific to 2 very important communications platforms today and important partners to Theta Lake. One is Zoom, support for Zoom AI Companion. And so again, doing all of the things we talked about today in terms of capturing that information from AI Companion meeting summarizations and other AI companions, and being able to identify potential risk and organize that information and retain what you need, not for every, perhaps not for every user, but perhaps just for regulated users. So it gives you that flexibility and choice. Now, the third one is support for Microsoft Copilot, and obviously really important in all of the things they do today. And there we do everything we've talked about thus far, in addition to capturing and identifying areas of risk that might exist around things like the prompts a user uses. And also some of the other things we do too here is when we identify risk, we have the opportunity to remove content from things like Teams chat and replace it with a notification around, hey, this is a potential policy violation. Here is some training content for you to look at and understand. So there's a proactive element as well, not just identifying the risk, but allowing organizations to take action and use that as an opportunity to remediate, redact, and give users an opportunity to learn and understand.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. A big thanks to Garth Landers for sharing those powerful insights. And if you're navigating UC compliance or thinking about how to secure voice, video, and messaging in today's AI-driven world, make sure to check out what Theta Lake is doing in this space. So as always, thanks for watching. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Rob Scott from UC Today. Thanks for watching.